All right, it's now a little after 3:50, so we're going to open oral session number 4. The first talk will be Rachel Frissell, Whiskey 2 Romeo Uniform Foxtrot from University of Scranton on introducing undergraduates to research through solar flares, Python, and amateur radio. Rachel?
Thank you very much for the introduction. Can everyone hear and see me? Perfect. Great. So, I'm Rachel Frissell. I have to include my maiden name because I have most of my degrees under than Frissell. So today, I'm going to talk about, as my presentation says, introducing undergrads to research through solar flares, Python, and amateur radios. And I want to acknowledge my co-authors, Dr. Nathaniel Frissell and Nicholas Trunkel, both from the University of Scranton. So a little background about myself. I started as a faculty specialist at the University of Scranton in fall 2021. Now, my research background's a little varied. I spent about 5-6 years in semiconductors, so I've done 3 5s in silicon. And then I switched over to space physics. I got involved as a ham radio operator, thanks to Nathaniel, in around 2017. Now, through all that, though, I do feel that research at the undergraduate level is very important. This presentation stems from trying to involve undergrads in research. So I agreed to help my colleagues develop a project to introduce research to first-year students. So I'm going to talk through what the project was, what resources we gave the students, and then what the outcome was. One thing I hope by this presentation is to get some good ideas, get some feedback. How does this project sound? We will be doing this again in the future, so what are some ideas? So what's the project statement? So the students were tasked with writing a short research paper studying the effects of at least one solar flare on the RBN WhisperNet amateur radio data. So they were posed with a couple of research questions. We gave them a couple ideas of what to look for in the data. And you can see here we have a picture of an X-class solar flare from September 2017. And all these questions could then be explored in the research paper that they were tasked to write. Now, the students coming in, most of these are first-year students. They don't have a real good background on space physics. It might be one of the first times they're hearing us talk about space physics. So we have to begin at square one and work our way up through introducing the idea of what is scientific research. So we started with showing them a couple graphics. And this graphic and the citations and my references from Nathaniel's paper, we look at the GOES data, and we see there's a solar flare there. So that's the top plot. Nice and easy for the students to understand. Then we say, okay, let's take a look at the radio data. What happens to it? We can see over here, this is pre-flare. So in our figure B, that's pre-flare, and C is after the flare. So you notice before the flare, there's lots of contacts. Then the solar flare happens. Now all of a sudden, there's a lot less. This is what the students are going to explore. And this project was nice because it's very visual. You can tell them, you see lots of contacts, something happens, then you don't. And we had them do a Kiwi SDR listening log just to understand what is a ham radio. Also, Nathaniel Frissell gave a talk about space physics in all the classes as well to give them further background on what they would be doing. All right, so in addition to all that support, we gave them a couple different tools. Here are the tools we gave them. And after I go through the tools, then you will see different screenshots of the tools or plots that were given. So we used Python, and we used Jupyter Labs a lot. We found that was very beneficial. It was a little more user-friendly for the students. So to begin, we gave them the Jupyter Lab, which contained the GOES 15 satellite data for the times of, we chose 3 times, May 2013, April 2014, and May 2015. So those were the 3 different times that they could choose solar flares from. Then, and we did specify that it had to be an X-class solar flare. Then we gave them a Jupyter Lab, which contained the amateur ham radio data from those same times. So now they have the GO satellite, and they have the ham radio data as well. Now, the data, the amateur ham radio data was obtained from WhisperNet and RBN. Then we gave them a Jupyter Lab workbook on plotting, because to understand these first 2 Jupyter Labs, they had to hone in on different time frames. So we wanted to make sure that they really understood how do you plot in Jupyter Lab. So we did a work day with them on plotting. Then we gave them an overleaf template which outlined a research paper. Most of them are first-year students. They're taking their English class, so they're learning how to write a paper. But what they don't have a lot of experience is what's the format of a scientific paper. We also went over what's a peer-reviewed paper as well, too. But it was pretty nice, and you'll see as a screenshot in this overleaf template, for each of the parts, we explained, okay, here is where you put the data, here's your conclusion, here's your abstract, and a short paragraph about what each of those parts mean. And then finally, we gave them a PowerPoint template for a research paper, which is similar to this template I'm using. But it was nice because it had all the different parts they would need, and that was one of the other tools we gave them. So then with those tools, the next 3 slides are those 3 dates we chose that they had to find the solar flare. So they would then, and we had about 15 students in each class.
There's a little bit of that. Don't want to come along after.
So they were allowed to choose a solar flare, and we also asked that no more than 2 students or groups per flare, so that way they would all have slightly different data. So we did have the template where it had the HamSCI. But then from here, they could choose which, if they want to zoom in on a certain day. So they might say, oh, there's something interesting right about around May 2013. Let me zoom in on that and see if I can identify when exactly that occurred. So that was for the May 2013. Then they had the April 2014, so very similar, just a different month. And then the May 2015. Now you can see here, I have a big red arrow there. The reason is, this is a solar flare that I chose that I'm going to work through for the next couple slides. So I said, well, I see a next class solar flare there. That's what I'm going to look at. So once they selected their flare, then they could use the Jupyter Lab notebook that had all the amateur radio data. Now, a lot of this data processing, myself and Nathaniel had already went through and done. So they had a working notebook that they were then able to choose what dates they wanted to look at. We really wanted to focus in on, do they understand the parts of a scientific paper opposed to making it purely a coding project. So we can see here, May 2015, we have both US and Europe. We have 7 megahertz and 14 megahertz, both for US and Europe. So the solar flare is happening somewhere around here. You can't really see anything. And this is where we told students, okay, now we need to go and dig a little deeper. So then we had what we called summary plots. And these were really nice because they had the GOES satellite data with all the ham radio data all in one. There were 5 plots together. And I have that on my poster. I have a poster tomorrow about the exact same topic. So we can see here, there's a solar flare. Oh, there's the response of the amateur radio data. So the students could see the flare and see the response. So once they were able to use that to try to figure out where the flare happened and then what happened after, as I mentioned before, the plotting was very important because that's how they were able to choose their dates. So we had them work through the Jupyter Lab plotting review. So this is a snapshot from that Jupyter Lab where I made them work through steps of how do you plot a parabola. So we started with something very simple for them, and they were able to modify it. We talked about how do you plot in Python, labeling the axes, setting the limits, making sure that they had the basics of the plotting. So what were the goals? So this space physics project, what were our goals and did we meet them? First, for students to have a better understanding of space physics. And I do think we did manage that. Great. Then we wanted them to understand tools that researchers use. And this project uses the Python to analyze ham radio data and satellite data, so showing really how powerful Python can be. Then having a working knowledge of manipulating the Jupyter Lab notebooks to form conclusions about the data. And then writing up the findings in the scientific paper and giving an oral talk on the findings. So we had them write not only a paper, but give a talk as well. So in order to write the paper, as I mentioned, we didn't just tell them, oh, go try to figure out overleaf. We did give them a nice template, and this was a template that I mentioned before where we split out into the parts with the introduction, and we described what is in an introduction. The methodology described what should go in that section, as well as results, discussion, summary and future work, and then we had their references as well too. And they were all able to download these. We did a lot of these steps in class to make sure that there was no problems with them downloading Overleaf, Python, and we got them started there. So just very quick teaching method in 6 easy step summary. On the HamSCI webpage, I'm actually working on trying to create a small little subset of a page that talks about this project. And I'm working through describing the different steps. I'm not going to go through and read all these, but I am trying to summarize it in the steps. The reason why I'm trying to do the documentation, I'm teaching an earth science course, and I found the SCRC, which is a Science Education Research Center. They have a lot of wonderful activities that professors and teachers have put for other educators to use, and that has been very beneficial when I'm teaching earth science, so I want to do something similar with this project if anyone else wants to use the idea. I would say this project takes about 7 weeks. We scattered it throughout the semester. I would say that would be a mistake. In the future, I would do more of a block. And I'm always looking for suggestions to improve the project, so I'm happy to hear any feedback. I'm not sure if there's time for questions, but if there is, thank you, and I'd be happy answering questions. Perfect, perfect. All right, so I do have a couple minutes. Any questions, feedback? Excellent.